Broadcasting from the Woodpeckers Studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stump.
So, episode 43, Stomp. Welcome to the podcast, the Slasher podcast.
Welcome back. Good to see you, Mike.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Yeah. So, I had a question for you about search and rescue.
Okay. Shoot.
Ambulance chasing. So,
okay.
You guys, have either one of you guys ever run into a scenario where, so it doesn't happen that often because, like, I don't really recall too many situations where, like, a search and rescue was, like, publicized as it was going on, but there's been a few times. But have you guys ever dealt with, like, ambulance chasers where people just show up when you're on a rescue where they're like, we're here to help?
Oh, you mean more in the sense, so when I heard the word ambulance chaser, I was thinking more like a lawyer looking for a case, like legal, right. Yeah, but you're thinking more of like ad hoc help or just...
like people that just show up to sort of be, you know, something came out over social media or a word of mouth and people just showed up and they were like, I heard there's a rescue, do you need help?
Good Samaritan is more the term, I think.
Yeah, or just unorganized volunteer, which can happen in a bigger case, like in a larger, more maybe multi-day event, but I've not seen it in my experience.
No, I haven't either. No.
And then it's actually welcome on the trail. So, you know, on the trail, that's just more help, you know, to assist with carrying someone. It's amazing that able-bodied people do walk by injured people, but it's been really interesting to see Fish and Game ask people, hey, if you don't mind taking a second, you know, do you mind putting your hand on this litter for a few feet, you know, and then pass on by. And that actually has helped on several carryouts that I've seen. And I thought it was a really good thing to do. It got people involved. It got the person down the trail. And I think it got the broader public to be aware and also to help out. But no, as far as a legal sense or as far as just random people just coming to kind of onlook, no, not experienced that.
So what brings up this topic?
Well, the reason I ask is there was a rescue, I think it was on Stowe, it was in Maine, and it was like a rare thing because I almost never see this happen in New Hampshire. I can think of one case, I can think of two cases. One where obviously Odin the dog, like everybody, that was all over social media, like we need help because the search and rescue teams don't necessarily do a formal approach. But I guess what happened with this situation in Maine was there was two hikers coming down, and I think it was Stowe, but don't quote me on that. And one of them was experiencing hypothermia, and the word got out over social media, and I think search and rescue teams were mobilizing to help these two guys. And I don't know if people showed up or not, but there was a post like the next day, and it was basically like they were either on search and rescue or were aware of it, and they were basically like, if you hear about a search and rescue going on social media, don't show up because we've got a team there that knows what they're doing and you're going to be a distraction. And I was sort of like, oh, that's an interesting topic to bring to Stomp and Mark to see what their what their thoughts would be on it. Because I can't think of any scenarios other than, I'm sure you guys, if you need an extra hand and people happen to be on trail, like Mark said, like you'll obviously take the extra help.
Yeah. Well, I know that early back in the beginning days of PEMI Search and Rescue, for instance, they were fielding a lot of public help during that search for that young boy up at Clearbrook. Clearbrook.
Oh, yeah.
So I know that was an issue back before the volunteer teams came into existence. So it may have been more of a problem back then, perhaps less now, but that's a great question about what role social media is having with that.
And that does bring, now that Jamie brings it to mind, it was relayed to me before my time. I did not live up here then, but I did hear of a case that may have been the same one, but there were hundreds and hundreds of people that came up from New York City looking to assist in a search. And the challenge then becomes, like any logistical organizational challenge, is managing the resources. And if these people are untrained and they're just, they're willing and they're able, but they're just, if you just have a mass of people, it gets really hard to organize them and give them sectors. And you have to basically find qualified people and break them all down and kind of make them into sub-teams and things like that. So I guess there is a point at which, unrequested help could become more of a hindrance than a help. it's hard because help is always wanted, but you want people that are not going to need rescued themselves. And you want people that are cognizant and aware, and is particularly in a search. A carry out is a much simpler thing, but a search is complex. And you have a responsibility not just to the victim, but to rescuers also. So I could see that becoming an issue. In that case,
that makes sense. And I think in general, like you would want to avoid ever putting anything sort of that's ongoing out on social media. I think your first avenue would always be to call the authorities before putting stuff on social media. I know that there was one rescue up on the ridge where a guy, I guess the only way he could get through was through social media, so he did post a sort of an SOS from there, but that's the only scenario I've ever recalled seeing over social media. So interesting. But I just figured I'd bring this to you guys.
That's an interesting point. I think that could come out a little bit later too, because the mechanism that you get a notification out on is really whatever's available. So, if there's a preferred method or not, I can jump ahead. Just jumping ahead very briefly, we're going to talk a little bit about, kind of just how military search and rescue and personnel recovery is conducted. And one of the tenets there is every unit is obligated to recover its own people. Mm-hmm. And, so if someone is in a party and if they've got contact with other people, or if they have family members or friends nearby, and if they want to alert them on social media, this could prevent and preclude using assets from other higher level agencies. In other words, like I wouldn't necessarily tell somebody not to. I mean, you could text, you could call, you could do whatever, but whatever platform is working for you. In other words, if someone can get the word out and someone they know could come and help them, this could preclude needing a rescue by a volunteer organization. I mean, we really augment Fish and Game here in New Hampshire. So, it would go through 911 to Fish and Game, and then volunteers may or may not get activated. But, if someone could call a friend or text a friend or, whatever, tweet a friend, I wouldn't necessarily tell them not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. Like every time I go hiking, especially when I'm solo, like my plan A is to text Stomp if I get in trouble and tell him to keep it quiet immediately.
Right.
Right. But Stomp, so we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. And just for the audience's sake, this is our friend Mark who's sharing some info, so we'll introduce him in a little while. But Stomp, do you want to? I got a couple of notes here. So do you want to talk about your new side gig here, because it does sort of tie into at least winter search and rescue stuff?
Yeah, sure.
Snowmobile stuff. So
I am working as a snowmobile guide for Northern Extreme Snowmobile up at Bretton Woods. So. It's a new gig, and I've been sitting. I sound a little raspy because I'm like shriveled to a prune because I'm just dehydrated, being out in the cold for 50 hours plus. It's like unbelievable. But it's been great. So yeah, it's my new part-time adventure, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah. So how's your ass feeling? Have you broken your ass in yet?
Well,
is a snowmobile like cycling?
I think I can draw a parallel with a horse for sure. Every snowmobile is quirky, and some are rambunctious, and they all have their own feel about them and this and that. But I'm standing a lot of the time. It's really cool. I have not had a problem with my ass. It's been my lips, my shriveled skin, because I'm trying to stay ahead on the water game. But it's just been a challenge. Cold. It's just damn cold out there right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do they have do those, again, my extent of my snowmobile knowledge is like I went 20 years ago, and the guys I went with crashed their snowmobiles, of course.
Oh, sure.
Like, it were just idiots. But don't they have, like, I've read some things, and I've had some friends. My friend Tom went to Yellowstone, and I think he was telling me, don't they have like heated like handlebars on these things?
Heated handlebars, heated throttle lever. The rider, if you're on a dual sled, has handlebars as well, or handles to hold on to that are heated. These machines are amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And as a guide, so basically you get assigned like a crew of people.
Yep.
And it's, what is it called? Northern Extreme?
Yes. Yeah. Mount Washington Snowmobile.
Got it. And they're out of Bretton Woods?
Yeah, they're right next door to Fabian's, right where the Cog Road starts.
All right, so then you get assigned like what, a group of like 4 or 5 people?
Dude, you have no idea. It could be a 1-hour tour up to 5-hour tour, and it could be one private person up to like 25. It's just outrageous.
Really?
It's amazing.
And they have to listen to you. Like, what have you had any disciplinary actions yet that you've had to deal with these knuckleheads?
Well, yeah, they're really, really strict about intoxication. If they
no
smell anything, see anything, there are situations where, if we see somebody vaping in their car, later.
Got it. Nothing.
Okay. And, to be honest with you, I get it. This is not the activity you want to be intoxicated for. It is inherently dangerous, and you're really going to get messed up if you take away from your reflex action, your awareness, whatever it may be. So totally get it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but like people think that and we always say this, like, oh, winter's the slow season, but for fish and game, it's not the slow season because they're dealing with people like falling in ice and they're dealing with snowmobile accidents all winter. So, and there's a whole list of them. There's probably been more than half a dozen that have come through in the last like 2 weeks. So
this was sort of the big opening weekend because there are trail associations that close the trails and say, okay, you guys can open and get to business. So they had to wait till, I think it's like 8 inches of snow before they can open the trails. So this was the big weekend. And you're right, there was at least half a dozen crashes with injury.
Jesus. And so
the modern machines are wicked fast. Yeah. They're crazy fast.
Absolutely. They rip. Absolutely rip.
And then you're taking like a crew of 5 people, and so you're basically telling them like follow the leader, so you can kind of keep their speed under control. And then you must have like rules around like they got to be separated for a certain distance, and they have to understand that like these things don't just stop like a car and blah blah blah. Right? Yeah,
we get them dressed. Most of these folks come in. I mean, from what I've seen, most come in 50-50, ill prepared, cotton, poor boots like those. I don't know, those rubber boots that people might wear, duck boots, uninsulated, that type of thing. So we give them the helmets, we get them dressed, we take them out to the sleds, and we give them a run through on how they operate, like you mentioned, and then we run through the New Hampshire regulations. So, I mean, a couple of the regulations right off bat, it's 2-lane traffic or 2-way traffic, so you have to stay in the right lane. There's never any passing for our clients. Speed limit's 45. We stop at all road crossings. There were hand signals that we use, like we'll tap. I'll tap on my head, my helmet, asking, "Are you okay?" And everybody responds back with the old head tap. I think they got that from Swiftwater, right, Mark, or Water Rescue?
I don't know.
Okay. Interesting. Or like, I'll put my right arm up at my shoulders at 90 degrees, elbow bent 90, and we're coming to a stop. So there's all these hand signals.
Yeah, I'm kind of used to that. Like when I haven't cycled in a while, but like we would do group rides on like Saturday mornings, and there was all kinds of hand signals for cycling. So it's probably going to be similar.
Yeah.
I thought they were getting away from hand signals with the snowmobiles because you really need 2 hands on the bar to control it properly, especially with a novice rider.
You're absolutely right. From my understanding, Fish and Game said ixnay on the hand signals, but as a guide, I'm in the lead. I have to signal everybody behind me. So what I do, if I put my arm up in that position, the half football goalpost position, people behind me don't mimic that to the people behind them. They will goose their brake a couple times lightly so that their rear view light, the brake light goes on a couple times so it informs people behind them. So it's pretty clever. But you're right, yeah. No more hand signals.
And do you give like people a rundown about like, okay, you're not wearing enough clothes, you're going to be screwed, or do you just sort of just let them go with what they go with, and if they complain, you bring them back early?
Well, here's the crossover with search and rescue. I mean, as a guide, generally they're not going out the door until they're ready, and if we come into subsequent issues like my hands are cold, we're prepared for that as a guide. So it's very much like search and rescue where we go up to somebody and we have all that stuff. It's in the reverse. Like we're starting out with these people in the other end at search and rescue. We're starting with somebody up at 3,000 feet and starting the process and then going backwards. So very interesting. I've had a couple interesting things like kids with cold feet, cold hands, that's a huge one. Cold neck. I mean, we encourage people to bring the balaclavas, and I have all that stuff in my pack. I have extra gloves, mittens, hand warmers, you name it.
Interesting. So this is cool. And Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I have like generally a negative impression of snowmobiles just because most of my interactions up north, like we have the place up in Maine, and I see a lot of snowmobiles, and it's usually just people that are just going way too fast. They're wearing like the hooded sweatshirts and not appropriate clothing for the conditions, and it just seems like a bunch of reckless people. But I do like the idea of going with a guide and sort of taking away all of that thinking about, like, especially 90% of the people up there are probably not experienced, and they're sort of going up there 1 or 2 times a year. So I would think that, going with a guide at least sort of limits the risk a little bit.
I would think so.
Yeah, and you're with a group and someone knows where you're going. I mean, you've mitigated a lot of the things that are going to cause someone problems. Just, again, going back to kind of like, search and rescue, people knowing your plan, people knowing where to begin looking, people knowing when you're overdue. You've prevented all of this because, you're with an outfit, they know a party's gone out. They know that there's a leader in the outfit.
Yeah.
I assume as much as possible, you have some communication with a rear element or support element or something like that.
Cell phone service is spotty, as we know.
Because we're in New Hampshire. But
at
the very least, someone knows to expect you back.
Sure.
And you're in a group.
And the way they work it here at this outfit, if it's a group over 6 sleds, then it's automatically you automatically have what they call a tail gunner. So you have another guy that's
lead
in the
a
back.
trail. Yeah.
So if there's say like 4 or 5 people that are really having a hard time managing the sled or going too slow, we'll hook them up with the tail gunner, and they'll take over. It'll split the tour in half so that the faster people can take off with the lead guy that started out with. And on top of that, if people go out on rentals, this is an interesting thing. People can just rent them outright and go and, hey, here's your map. Have fun.
Yeah. Those are the ones that seem like that's where they get in a lot of trouble, is like, rent this, 80 mile an hour machine and go out and do what the hell you want. And those are the ones that seem like they're driving off the road and getting in trouble.
Could be, but I mean, I can only speak for this place. They don't rent to inexperienced people, and they will not let them take. Well, let's say there's 2 sleds on a tour. One has to be a double just in case one breaks down so that they have something to go back on.
I will.
Sorry. No, that's okay. They try to mitigate it. They, as best they can.
And I'd just like to throw in, like, the snowmobile is a different kind of machine, and I could appreciate, there are some impacts from its use. And the 2 strokes tend to be pretty noisy, and there can be, just like anything else, there can be riders who are a little excessive. But I must say that in New Hampshire and Maine, I mean, anywhere you are in the winter, it's a device that can get you that places where nothing else can. And you can see views because there's no vegetation. You can see views, and these are like, you might be on the same mountaintop in the summer, and you just get phenomenal lines of sight, and you just get to see and appreciate the terrain in a way that you never would otherwise. I mean, unless you were maybe, on a cross-country ski or on a snowshoe or hiking up yourself, post-holing up to the top. But the like, just even small hikes like Stinson Mountain, or 3 Ponds or something like that.
Yeah.
You go over 3 Ponds in the winter on a snowmobile, and that view is just phenomenal. And in the summertime, you never get that line of sight. And so even modest little hills that you wouldn't even think of, because we're in all these 4,000 footers.
Yeah.
And there's Mount Washington at 6,000 feet. But you can go on a 1,700 foot hill 5 miles from here and see a view that'll just take your breath away. And on a snow machine, it's possible to do it in a few minutes. And, if you're debilitated, if your legs or hips or back don't support you hiking up there, it is an amazing way to get out and enjoy winter. And so I just wanted to put that out there because, I've seen it and I've been blown off the trail by people too. And it's that's not fun. No. But I just wanted to point out that there's some things that can be seen on a snowmobile in the winter that are really, it's almost the only thing that could get you there.
Yeah. And I want to add on to that. It's like coming from the perspective of a long-term hiker, I'm blown away by the network of snowmobile trails. It is absolutely mind-blowing where it takes you and what you can see, and it's stick season. So you get, like, for instance, we're working in Jefferson Notch essentially at this point. We do 5-hour tours all the way up to Gorman, Berlin, and stuff like that. The other day we did a 3-hour tour that's basically went up to Caps Ridge, over to Randolph, and then up to Wambeck, and then back. It's just mind-blowing. Wow. And you see all these remote ponds that you'd never get to otherwise. It's just awesome. Super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I would pay big money just to get driven up to the Caps Ridge like trailhead without having to walk up there. Then just drop me off on your tour, and then I'll do the hike and then come back down.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. It's so great.
But I can only imagine. Like I think about like Nash Stream Road would be cool to take a snowmobile and like do Percy Peaks.
Yeah.
Or also like Success Pond Road and getting out to like that back end of the Mahoosics and that area there too would be awesome.
Yeah, and I think as a podcast, it's sort of a shame that we've neglected this. It's sort of in our legal documents, like where all things search and rescue, and snowmobiles are a big part of it. And I think we should cover it here and there a little more than we do, because it's pretty fascinating.
I've done a snowmobile rescue for the fire department.
Oh.
But, we had a wreck on 155 right up there in Ellsworth.
Interesting.
Right, about a mile from Ellsworth Pond. And at Campton here, we have a snowmobile, and it's got a sled. And we went back and got the patient and packaged her up. They had gotten into an S-turn. The fellow had not ridden in about 20 or 30 years and got a brand new machine, real high-powered machine, and he just accidentally goosed the throttle. His hand got pegged, and
it happens.
They both got thrown off the device, and she had a period of unconsciousness, and she was bruised up pretty badly. They both went over the bars and into the hillside. But we were able to package her up and get her out. And again, that was facilitated with a snowmobile because, getting back on these trails, some of these trails are quite remote. So if you're going to get someone off of them, you're going to have to go in on a four-wheeler or a snowmobile, some device.
So that's a hell of an opening segment, huh?
Hell of an opening, but I got one more thing.
We're just in the opening. Sorry, I got lost.
We're just in the opening, Mark. Like
lost.
This is a 20-minute opening. We haven't even got to the show summary yet. I haven't even introduced you. Who is this guy? I want to know who this guy is talking.
No,
anyway,
fantastic.
But Stomp, so one other thing, and this is something that I struggle with, is like I go to a restaurant, I'm no problem. You got good service, I'm going to tip you 20, 25%. You go, if you valet my car, I sort of know what the deal is, like how much to give.
Yeah.
When I do like these like snowmobile things, or I do like, I've done like jet ski tours in Bermuda, and I've done like all these other tours, like I don't know what the fuck to tip you guys. Like what are you, like you need to get some money. Like what are you supposed to tip a guy that does a tour on a snowmobile? If there's like 5 people, you can't get into it?
It really varies depending on the person that walks through the door. I mean, you're talking about, I get the impression that because it's next door to Bretton Woods and the Omni, that there's perhaps a more affluent clientele perhaps, but that's not always the case. So it totally varies. The tips are all over the map.
Listen, anybody listening right now, if you do this snowmobile tour and you got a guy named Stomp that's your tour guide, you better throw him some cash. All right, don't be cheap. Tip these people.
Yeah, we'll give you a plug on the podcast.
Give you a plug. All right. Well, you can tell me offline, but anyway, I just want to throw that out there. But if you are doing a tour like this, like tip your whatever tour guide or your guide or whatever that is.
Well,
I don't really know
they
what the
deserve
rules are,
it.
but like,
I mean,
if they
deserve it, because I'm sure there are guides out there that don't give half an ass, but thankfully I'm with a crew that's absolutely top notch. These guys are phenomenal.
Although there is something to be said, like I've done like deep sea fishing and stuff like that, and like the guys they'll just yell at you and be mean to you, but it's like it's sort of like that's the aesthetic. I kind of like I get it.
Right,
like
that might be part of it.
Can get away with that.
Yeah, that's wicked funny.
Anyway, it is. All right. So you want to do sponsors and coffee talk?
Yeah, Stacy Tardif donated 5, and Audrey Elkinson donated 5. Thank you very much. And special thanks to our sponsor at Rek-lis Brewing, where you'll enjoy the best food, craft beer, and fun just 15 minutes from Franconia Notch. Many 4,000 footers in less than 10 minutes from the 5 corners.
All right, and then I'm just pulling this up because I got 2 things. I found out giant moon penis, and I also found out about someone.
Okay. Mark, this goes back a ways, this giant moon penis thing.
Mark's like, what the hell are you guys talking about here?
Yeah, I'm just in rapt attention.
He's like, where's the exit of this place I'm in?
He's like, let me out of here. All right, so
still in the intro.
Someone, I'm not going to give her full name, but Shandy is the someone that donated the 10 coffees and was giving a shit about not answering our emails. Although I don't know what the deal is there. That's Tom's fault. So she was like, keep up the good work. So she called it out. And then our friend Dylan, he is the one that did the GMP on Instagram. So thank
Dylan,
you for that. I'll give you the info. I'll give you the last name.
Right. Hey, I did not see this woman's email. I checked that email.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, Dylan uses an alias like you do, so I'll fill you in on who that is. So.
Excellent.
Anyway, but so thank you very much to everyone, and it's a new year, so we got new expenses for the podcast, so we appreciate it. And then as a reminder, if you could do reviews on Apple Podcast, that would be great. Give us 5 stars and then write a review saying how great we are. If you got a problem and you don't want to give us 5 stars, don't give us a review. Anything else, Tom?
I think that's good. Let's get to the show summary.
All right. 26 minutes in. So tonight we're joined by Mark Roland. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Hey, Mark.
Mark is an active search and rescue team member in New Hampshire. He's going to share some stories of his search and rescue experiences, and we'll talk about search and rescue from both a civilian and a military perspective. So we've typically only touched on civilian SAR teams, so I'm excited to hear about the military side of search and rescue. And then later on in the show, we will talk a little bit about trail building, and then we will plan to close the show out with a discussion on Joe Dodge. And Joe is a person who holds a significant place in White Mountain history, so excited to learn about that. And then we'll close the show out with a little bit of info about snowmobile accidents. So we already talked a little bit about snowmobile, so we'll talk a little bit more about some incidents that happened this weekend. So I'm Mike.
And I'm Stomp. Let's get started.
Great. So any beer for you or any drink, Stomp?
I have a little black box Cabernet sitting up there on the shelf, but I've got the water right next to it. The black box goes back to the first episode, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think
this
so.
This is a tradition. We have a drink discussion, and sometimes Steve will come in and talk about brews and so you heard that one. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have been abstaining from beer since about November. It's not because I dislike beer, but it's just because I like all the high gravity stuff.
Yeah.
And winter food tends to be, has a lot of calories and everything anyway. So I figured out if I take the beer out of the equation, everything works out.
Isn't
and if
it
I
amazing?
leave beer in, things happen. So, and the other thing too is just being available for call outs and things like that. It cuts into that. And I'm the father of a 2-year-old. So, just being available and clear headed has raised itself in value.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately I have nothing new to contribute for this part of the segment.
Yeah, well, I think I can add to the trifecta here because I'm drinking water tonight because I'm still dealing with the effects of COVID.
Wow. Well, like what? What are you feeling? Can you smell?
It's like morphed into. I went running, so I tried to get back. I run every day, but I tried to go back to running, but I went on Saturday. And I stopped. When I stopped running, and I felt fine during the run, but I stopped, and then I started like sort of violently coughing, and I can feel like a bronchitis or a pneumonia type thing sort of creeping into the top of my lungs. So I'm just like coughing at night and stuff. And I had this incident like 2 years ago. So I called the doc today, and they're giving me some like an inhaler and some medicine. So I'm just like not feeling the, I just have this sense that like if I'm dealing with this, I probably shouldn't be drinking beer.
Sounds fair. How long ago did you get it, if you don't mind me asking?
I got COVID on January 9th, so we're recording this on the 24th. And really, like the COVID was like the 2 first days were kind of like no big deal. And then I had 3 days of just sort of fever and chills and just not feeling great and sleeping a lot. And then I was fine after that, but I just haven't been able to sort of kick the congestion, and the cough has just started to pick up. But I've had this situation with pneumonia in the past enough times that I sort of want to hit it early. So I just figured I'll drink some water. But definitely 100% don't recommend COVID. Stay away.
Noted. I concur.
Nice.
Yes,
So we are all a bunch of losers. So next topic here would be recent hikes. So I have nothing to contribute from that because, matter of fact, me and Stomp were talking about going on a hike this weekend, but that couldn't happen. So did you get out at all, Stomp?
No, like I'm just sitting on a sled going 50 miles an hour every single day for 9 hours straight.
But you are out. I imagine you get to see some. I mean, you're up on some ridges and things, right?
I am, but
you're just not hiking.
It's certainly not hiking, but that's why I try to stand up on a thing as long as possible. It's like, woo. Have you been out hiking, Mark?
I've not hiked, but I did get out riding a snowboard for the first time since my boy came.
Nice.
So I did go out and got to enjoy Cannon yesterday, and I lived to tell the tale. And it was nice to just get up and look across over the Franconia Ridge and everything like that.
Beautiful mountain.
Yep. How was the coverage on Cannon? Is it pretty good?
Yeah.
Coverage?
It was really good. I forget what the official count was of how many trails were open, but I mean the whole mountain was virtually open. There were a lot of people there enjoying themselves, but there were definitely plenty of open runs and plenty of places to go. That mountain can fit a lot of people.
I drive by Avalanche every morning and I look up at it and it's as icy as it always is.
It's
like
I keep hearing like across the news, like there's been a lot of complaints. I guess Attitash's general manager quit. And then there's been a lot of complaints about like lack of like snowmaking and Attitash, and then I think some issues with like crowds on Wildcat, and then I think the Vail Resorts owns like I think Crotchet Mountain. They came in. Crotchet was known as like they did a lot of like overnight ski. I think they had like till 3 a.m. They did Midnight Madness, and they've cut all that back. So I've been hearing a lot on the news about sort of the resorts that are owned by Vail have been not great this year, but I think Cannon's owned like through a separate contract with the state of New Hampshire, right?
New Hampshire, isn't it? Or someone may run it, but I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's in the state park there.
Yeah,
it's a good question.
It's
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's just like we haven't had a lot of snow cover, so maybe you can't blame the resorts. But I haven't never heard anything bad about Cannon other than obviously it's icy, but it is what it is.
But no new hikes for me either. So
all right, well,
we'll get out one of these
I promise
days.
the audience I'll get out sometime.
I'm just waiting for people to need rescued. That's my avenue into the backcountry.
See, that's the way I roll. I tell Mike every week.
I stay put together, just for your emergency.
Yeah.
That's
my hiking.
That's my whole plan. So,
all right.
That's
Everybody
great.
shut off this podcast and go out there and get in trouble so these guys can stay busy with the winter. So, all right. So segment 1 here. Jesus, we are how far into this here, Stomp?
It's awesome.
We're 33 minutes into our segment 1.
People love long episodes, and the last few have been sort of paltry on the time, but good. I thought the last few episodes were pretty good.
Yeah, they're all great. They're all fantastic, right? But so this segment 1, we're going to talk about military search and rescue, and we're going to get into this with Mark.
It's time for Slasher's Guest of the Week. Very cool. Very cool.
I'm really glad that you joined us tonight, Mark. I had the idea of this, the crossover with military search and rescue, just out of a personal curiosity, really, and maybe to draw some contrast between what you've experienced over the years and what we do up here in New Hampshire. But I came to know Mark, maybe 2 years ago now.
Full 3 now.
Yeah, full 3 years.
It'll be the 4th year this summer.
Yeah, Mark volunteered to do some search and rescue, and since then, I've come to know him a little bit better. He's, you're a pretty amazing guy. I mean, you're. Can I say the Y word that you're involved with?
The Y word.
It rhymes. It rhymes with yogurt.
Oh yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Okay, so this guy. He's into yoga. Are you still teaching?
Yeah, one day a week in Lincoln.
Amazing.
Yep.
That's so great. He has quite a military background, which is extensive. But what caught my attention about you right off the bat was just your ability to educate and to instruct. There was a period where you were contributing with training plans and things like that, and just the extent of your knowledge was very impressive right off the bat. So I'm really psyched to talk about that. How did you end up in New Hampshire? Where are you from?
I'm from State College, Pennsylvania. Born and raised there. I ended up in New Hampshire I fell in love, honestly. Although there is a clause in our relationship.
The state or somebody else.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned that, Mike, because there's a clause in our relationship, and it goes something like this, and that is, I love New Hampshire regardless of you, and it's not a negative. It's not, but it comes from the fact that I was hiking through the state. I was coming south on the Appalachian Trail, and It wasn't a full through hike bid. It was just, I started hiking in Maine and I liked it and it went well. So I just kept on going. And before you know it, I'm not in Maine, I'm in New Hampshire. And I come down, and my now wife, Sandy, lives here in Campton, and she was a friend of a friend. So I zeroed, term meaning I took a day off, or I overnighted as I came down through the Whites. I just would catch a ride to her house and then, stay over, and then I would hit another section and spend another 5 days out. And this was a miracle. This was something I did not know about. I hiked through the Whites in the peak of summer and never hiked on a Saturday or Sunday, just by accident of the way I had come down through the sections. So I never saw the throngs of people up on the Franconia Ridge occur in August. I'm in August and September coming down through here, and just the timing worked out. But of course, I hiked down through and out through Vermont, and eventually, the hike outpaced, my ability to stay at Sandy's. So I came off the trail after Connecticut. I was just kind of ragged out, and my fun meter was not pegged any longer. Mm-hmm. But Sandy's job keeps her up here. She works all over New England. And it was one of these things where if we were going to explore the relationship, I just decided, we're just going to have to be together. So I packed up my car and I moved up here. And Sandy
That's awesome.
was concerned about, hey, well, what happens if it doesn't work out? And I loved the Whites. My impression when I came through the Whites was clearly someone had failed me along the way in my education, that they didn't let me know that this giant mountain range was right here. Right. But I like secluded areas. I like mountains. I like remote places. So I vibed with it immediately. But Sandy was concerned, what happened if we don't work out? And I was like, look, I like it up here well enough, that I love New Hampshire regardless of you. And so that alleviated her anxiety about me moving up here and then just getting, left for nothing. Mm-hmm. But that brought me up here, and we've been together ever since. And we have a little boy named Ben. So clearly we got along. But that's what brought me to New Hampshire. But I fell in love with Sandy, and I fell in love with the Whites pretty much all at the same time.
Okay. And before this, so you were trying to do the whole AT?
It didn't begin it wasn't a full through hike bid, although it could have gone that way.
Yeah. I
did the 100-mile wilderness in Maine.
Okay.
And
gotcha.
I was hiking with a CPAP machine at the time for sleeping at night. And it's a battery powered contraption, and charging up batteries and everything like that. That was the long pole in the tent for me, was the logistics of charging those batteries, and also the extra weight. That was an extra 6 pounds of weight. Yeah. I mean, any real hiker probably just crapped themselves when I just said that. But because, modern hiking doesn't even talk about anything in terms of pounds, but everything increased in my load proportional to that. My bag had to be heavy enough and rugged enough to handle that machine and the batteries. And logistically, I had to do more zeros to charge the batteries up and stuff. So
interesting. So for what, do you mind talking about the condition? Was it?
Yeah, just sleep apnea. Okay. Obstructive sleep apnea.
Which is interesting. So, you don't come across to me as the profile.
No, there's a lot of it.
He's saying you're not, I always think in terms of big dudes. I can't really see you perfectly, but you don't seem like a big guy. So I always think
6'2", 180.
He's thin as a rail.
No, there's a large cohort of us from my former line of work, for military special operations, things like that. There's a large cohort of us that have it, and they're not
secondary.
And we're not typical. Typical is older, male, obese, sedentary lifestyle. There is kind of a type that it doesn't mean there are other people that suffer from it, but they're not sure if it has to do with the off-cycle stuff, like getting your circadian rhythm just completely jacked up, or the stress hormones or whatever. But we do have a proportionally kind of large bubble of those of us who have been through these kinds of jobs that kind of present with it. And early in life too. I've had it for I've had my diagnosis for 10 full years now. Yeah. And so, I was only 38 when all this started.
That's very interesting. So
how loud are those machines?
You probably wouldn't know it if it turned on next to you. It can make a little kind of whoopee cushion sound, or like a squeaky noise, like if the seal breaks on the mask or whatever. Yeah. But they're pretty whisper quiet.
No one's going to try to kick your ass in the shelter for turning the machine on.
I personally don't partake of shelters unless life require, it's like life, limb, or eyesight. But but no, I mean, I've slept in hostels, I've slept in tents with people, I have slept in shelters with people. I've been on a plane with them. Nobody's ever complained. The mice running across your face are louder than the machine.
That's true. Yeah.
So essentially, to me, it appears that you're into public service. So we have, you're serving for volunteer search and rescue. You're now employed? Are you volunteering down at Campton for the EMS, or? So
it's call department. So the structure is, I mean, you are volunteering, but you're paid while you're on a call. Okay. So, I mean, it's technically, it's call department. Where I'm from, they have volunteer fire departments, but up here, the way the law is, basically, they have to pay you. I think it has to do with workers' comp and coverage, similar to how when we're on a volunteer status on a search, we're technically state employees, even though we're volunteers.
Gotcha. So public service is in your blood. So what drew you to the military, and when did that come in? Let's dig back a little ways, and then we'll just jump towards more proximate stuff.
It's funny you were lamenting not having long enough shows. You're gonna regret having them. You'll have a long enough show. So I went into the military straight out of high school. At the time, the Gulf War was building up. So I graduated high school in 91. Okay. But I enlisted in the military actually October of my senior year. So I knew I wanted to go. And so being a stick your toe in the water kind of a kid, I went with the Army because they had a short-term enlistment contract, that let you kind of go try it out. And so my first thing was only 2 years plus training time. So it was like 2.5 years. And, because I was just like, well, I mean, I think I might like this, but I don't know. So and my first enlistment, I was a Cav Scout. And, of course, Gulf War came and went before I even graduated high school. I mean, that thing ramped up and happened and was over. Yeah. But I was a Cav Scout. I was stationed at Fort Drum, New York. And after my first term, I got out and I came back to State College, Pennsylvania, which is home of Penn State University main campus. Mm-hmm. I had what we would know now to say like readjustment, challenges. Sure. And just growing up in a college town, it's hard. There's a lot of distractions. And I come from a very wonderful place, but I have never been my best self there. Mm-hmm. And a few years later, after I was landscape laborer and stuff like that, but after a few years, I decided, I really liked the Army and I really appreciated it. I had been to Somalia. I'd been to Hurricane Andrew relief while I was on active duty. And I was just like, it suited me and I seemed to suit it. So I went back in 97. Okay. And then I stayed in from 97. I retired in 2016 with 21 and a half years. Wow.
Okay. So you must have seen a lot, but how did you get into the education side of it and the training side of it? Well, that seems to be your main focus, right? Or
it's integral to the whole thing. Everything in the military, you're training with the people first. If you get trained in individual tasks, they teach you the very basics. But then from there on in, you're a part of a team. But you not only train together, but you train each other. And then the minute you know something, the very next thing they have you doing is turning around and teaching someone else. Because everything in the military is designed to run with whomever. It's very, very little personality based and very much just what the operational requirement is and what the role requires. So we very much, you teach everybody everything you know. And even if it's not your specialty, if someone's next to you, they teach you what you need to know about their job. Because, for example, the medic is the medic, but the medic gets shot too, right? The medic needs someone to work on him if he's the person who's the patient. But everything in the military model is about replicating the system. So you get very steeped in it early on. But I was a Ranger instructor after I attended Ranger school, and then a couple of years later I went back. I was a Ranger instructor, and I was in the Army Special Forces, known as the Green Berets, and one of our principal roles is training foreign militaries and foreign elements. So there is quite a bit of, so you do become accustomed to training people in various circumstances and various conditions. We're not just creating cookie cutters of ourselves. It's about the capability. What capability does this person or organization require, and what do they have? What are their resources? What are their approaches? So I guess I am a little bit comfortable with training, and giving out information.
I have a question about special forces. So this is real. Let's stop. We're going to be in manly shit here. When you're talking about Rangers and Green Berets and in Navy SEALs and stuff, like, I don't know much about this stuff. Like, I'm a big wimp, but I know, like, I got some friends. One of my best friends was in the Rangers. But when it comes to, like, getting in, I always hear these stories about, like, only 2% of the people will make it all the way through, and it's like the elite of the elite. Can you talk a little bit about, like, is that legit? Like, is it really that hard, or do they just, like, hype that up to, I don't know, to just sort of make it, like, seem like it's more elite than it is? Like, what's the deal there?
No, I don't think. Now, there's the Barry Sadler song from 1964, "The Ballad of the Green Beret." If you've never heard that, give that a listen. Just for if you like old timey 60s ballads, that's one for you. But he was a real Green Beret, and that was a hit song in the 60s. But it talks about 100 men will test today, and we do have females now too, by the way. Yeah. And only 3 will win the Green Beret. So that alludes to a 3%, pass through rate. Attrition in a training pipeline happens through many number of circumstances, and some of them can be physical, some of them can just be washing out through the education process. I've not kept abreast of what the very current numbers are, but one thing that's interesting, looking at people is a soft science, but things do mean out, and over time and over different training mechanisms and over different lengths and different ways of organizing the events, the numbers do seem to flush out pretty consistently. So whatever you're hearing, particularly if it's from like any kind of an official source, is probably very correct. And a lot of it just has to do with it's very intense physically, it's intense psychologically, it's hard on families. It's hard on individuals. So there's layers of things, and there's not any one real thing that's going to, keep someone from getting to the end. Perseverance does pay off, but there's also this combination of factors of, physical fitness, mental fitness, having the time available in your life, choosing to make this a number one priority for years at a time. The Special Forces training pipeline itself is about 2 years long. So it's a significant commitment. But the numbers are more or less
by trade. Yeah, I'm a recruiter by trade, so I always think about pipelines, and I'm always thinking in terms of, with special forces training, if it is really as narrow a flow through at the end as I hear it is, it's interesting. Like, I wonder when they get down to the point where, say, they have 100 people that start, and then they find towards the end that they've got 20 that realistically could make it. Like, is there a mandate where you say, like, okay, we can never take more than X people through the entire training? And now we've got 20, but we got to shake 15 of these people out, even though they might be above the bar. Like, I don't know.
That's
if it
never
gets
the
to that
issue.
level.
I mean, the issue is always just getting enough personnel to the force.
Okay.
It's consistent across history, and it does ebb and flow a little bit with major conflicts, but these are what they call in the military vernacular low density MOSs, military occupational specialties. That meaning they're always hard to fill. People aren't breaking their neck to get into this stuff because they do know how hard it is, and there are all kinds of challenges within it. There are swimming challenges, and hiking is the means through which a lot of the assessment and selection is conducted. And rucking very long distances with heavy weights, and there's land navigation, and there's other skills tests, and you have to be a team player. The attributes, what we've gone to. And I say in recent years, but I'd say in the last decade or more, the whole person is really evaluated. And we all have different strengths and weaknesses, but there's picture like a dartboard with little wedges, and one being physical and one being mental, and another being team player, and another being maybe your technical aptitude, and another being language and whatnot. Everybody will kind of have an arrangement, sort of like a shot group, and they'll clump together. But clearly, you can't have them too far out. Like, they've got to be within the standard, across the board. but we've not had the problem of having too many qualified people. It's often goes the other way. It's just, the force, the number of deployments, the operational organization, the size has increased. So that adds demand, and it's a constant challenge just maintain qualified people. Mm-hmm. At least by my recollection.
Yeah, no. Based on what Stomp pretty well. You've known him for 2 years. Like, you think he'd make it, or would he quit after like the first week?
Currently, I would have made it maybe 10 years ago.
He's based on the time we've spent together, he's really, I feel, one of the people that would probably be pretty ideal. At least on the special forces side, because he has a flexibility of, he's not a really linear kind of regimented kind of a person, but he also understands the team dynamic, and he certainly is physically strong and very capable. It is a young person's sport. Mm-hmm. It's like the NFL or the Rockettes or anything else that involves, youth and vigor. There are people, my age still doing it, but, you're using your joints, and your joints have X number of repetitions in them, so. A
funny side story, when I first joined Search and Rescue, that's what started the whole 60 pounds in my pack, Mike, because I did research about the admission criteria for some of the special forces, and they were like, consider doing a Pemi loop 33 miles with 70 pounds in your pack. I mean, I was like, that's what they're doing? Holy moly. I got to up my game.
I'd never make it.
Incredible.
I'd never make it. I'd be like, can I join the personnel department, please? I can't handle that.
That's honorable work too. The whole team.
Exactly.
It's all a team thing. It all comes together.
Exactly. You need human resources.
So the term search and rescue means search and rescue, whether you're in military or if you're a volunteer in New Hampshire. What differences do you see between military search and rescue and what's happening here in New Hampshire with Fish and Game and these volunteer groups?
So it's really interesting. I'll begin by saying there's a lot of similarities. Mm-hmm. And then the differences shake themselves out. But in the military, the difference is, okay, so when you hear the word like combat search and rescue, which is clearly search and rescue conducted in a military environment, the Air Force and the Navy maintain dedicated units with that as a primary job and a primary responsibility. In other words, we have this piece of equipment and we have this team, and their only job in life is to train for and execute search and rescue missions. With that being said, every component of the U.S. military can be tasked with performing search and rescue, and the way we do it organizationally is it's the unit's responsibility to recover their own people first and foremost. And this makes sense for a few different reasons. The organization that you're from, or the people that know you, the basic tenets of the military are that you know where your people are. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's the thing I'd like to point out as a difference. First off, that's a big one. In the military, the operating assumption, your responsibility as a unit member is to know where you're at and to know where the rest of your team is at. The responsibility of your unit leadership is to always know where you are at, and you're all working together, and you're all supposed to know where each other are at all the time. So if that has diverted in any way, you already have an issue. So we are already pre-programmed to basically not need to do search and rescue, because you should never ever be missing. It's just like Forrest Gump. You have your battle buddy. He's like, that's your first team. Then your second team is whatever small assemblage of a unit you have, and then it goes into larger and larger elements. But the minute someone doesn't know where someone is in the military, that's already a red flag. That's already a problem. And it's your unit's number one job in life to get you back immediately, right then and there. So larger events are largely mitigated and prevented. And the other thing the military has going for it is we educate everybody at a base level coming in. So everybody knows the basics of, at least map and compass, at least how to comport yourself. They know, and again, at a lower level, this is all very basic, but we're all on the same understanding. Know where you're at. Don't get lost. If you are lost, that's a problem and you need to fix it. And then from there, if it's from your unit is most likely to know what they tasked you with, where you were, how to get you back. And then if they need more resources, they can ask for them and it will come. It's Department of Defense policy. It's our contract with these people that we will absolutely get you back. Mm-hmm. We're still getting pilots back out of Vietnam. It might just be a femur 70 years later, but
I get you.
We will come and get you. But that's different. On the civilian side, everything is volunteer, and everything is people can make a plan if they want to. People communicate if they choose to. People can ask for help if they'd like to. But on the civilian side, everything's an opt-in method. Whereas on the military, we've got so many. It's baked in the cake. The not being lost part is baked in the cake, and then the recovering people quickly is already going on. And every element in the military they know about search and rescue techniques. If you think about it, finding people is our job. What you do with them when you get there is just a sub-layer. In other words, finding the enemy is the same as finding your friend. It's just different actions on contact.
Mm-hmm. I would think too, on the civilian side, like you don't have, I guess, as many factors when it comes. Like I think of the guy like Bo Bergdahl that just walked off, and like I think there was like a 2 or 3 day period where they were like really going crazy trying to find him. But you're dealing with like outside risk to yourself, whereas in civilian in New Hampshire, like you don't have to worry about someone coming out of the woods and shooting you. But obviously in the military, like the risks are much higher.
So that does complicate the layers, and that's where there are layers of complexity, and that's where you do get into more specialized methods, and this. So you're right, Mike. You're absolutely right. So search and rescue would be like the plain vanilla, and that happens in the military too. Like someone just wanders off, maybe not even in a combat zone or whatever, and you're just looking for them. So very clean. You're not worried about people shooting at you. You're not worried about concealing the act that you're looking for them, or you're not worried about them trying to conceal themselves from being found. Mm-hmm. See, that's the hard part in the military is you're trying to be found, but only by the people that you want to find you, right? So you're playing like hide and seek with some people, but you're playing find me with other people, and it's all at the same time. Incredible. So this adds layers of complexity, but we plan all that in also. So that's where it does take some different directions, and this can go up to and including, areas that we call denied areas where like there's not even a U.S. presence in there, and you might be using all kinds of different ways to get these people out. But bringing it back to the individual actions are the same. Mm-hmm. And that's what's interesting is if you're a responsible hiker, first of all, you're doing something within your capability. You're giving your plan to somebody. You've got some kind of a notification, even if it's just like a drop dead, like if you don't hear from me by X time on X day, something went wrong, and those are the things that go a long way to helping. Mm-hmm. And the way you organize and conduct a search is largely the same as well. Again, the difference out here being it's more voluntary and it's more opt-in, right? Like in other words, we can't just say, hey, you're not doing X activity today, you're looking for this person. Mm-hmm. It's based on kind of everybody's sort of volunteer level prioritization, but the individual action or the actions on the side, once you start looking for the person, looking for a person is looking for a person. Mm-hmm. You've got a command element. You're organizing whatever array of capabilities you have to find this person. You're using the tools you have to figure out where they might be, how they might be. You clearly want to locate them as soon as possible. There are elements that are similar, and sometimes you might not be able to get them back, but you can support them. Like in other words, we might not be able to get a person out immediately, but we could maybe find them, contact them, and at least keep them warm, give them some food, give them some water until we work out a plan of getting them out. Now, the scope and scale in the middle of the whites is a lot less than supporting them in a country somewhere, but it's all the same concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you think we're structured to do the job well here in New Hampshire for what we face?
Well, I mean, well is really a product of, are there a lot of lost people wandering around out there? I mean, in other words, it clearly works here, or there would be something else happening. You know what I mean? It's kind of a needs-based system. If there were too many people getting lost, or if they were staying out there and never being found, we would probably be doing it differently. Because clearly,
that's an interesting question, though, because the numbers are going up. Is that a function of our performance or just interest in hiking, or what do you think about that?
Well, it seems our numbers have been, at least in the past few years that I've been up here, it seems that the numbers are pretty consistent with rescues a year and calls for service to fish and game. And,
What's your take on that, Mike? Because this guy, he's the data cruncher. He could give us some...
I think, and again, I got to get off my butt and do the 2021 summary, but I think the theme that I'm hearing, and I think Ty kind of confirmed this as well, is that the call outs I think are pretty steady year over year, but it sounds like there's a fair number of increases the last couple of years in the
escorts.
The escorts or the sort of the fishing game calls where they're saying like, okay, you can wait it out overnight and then walk yourself out. The panic calls that aren't getting sent for rescues.
Personally, I think it's absolutely amazing for the 2.5 million visitors or 3 million visitors a year that they have here.
Yeah.
That it's not more. I honestly am amazed, and I think that's really. It goes to show how we constantly underestimate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen the gambit of people, and I'm not one to bash novices because, frankly, just the call outs I've been on have largely been mid-level people. There have been a handful of novices and there have been a handful of like really expert hikers, but the vast majority are people with a bit of hiking under their belt, and then that one ankle roll or that one old injury or that one false step on that one spot of Falling Waters Trail, and that gets you your litter carry out. But
right.
And just my perception of I've been here for 3 full seasons, so that's just in my snapshot of it. To answer your question more specific about the assemblage of how it happens here, I think it's a very interesting combination. Fishing Games charter is really broad. We touched on it in the opening. They've got all the snowmobile stuff. They've got all the ATV stuff. They've got the fish and the game part. But then and then they've got the responsibility for basically of all the rural, missing people in the state and all of the dives. So they have a really broad responsibility.
They have police power.
Yeah, full police power. So they're basically like a gendarmerie auxiliary to the state police, which is very interesting.
Right. So I've heard the term quasi-military. Is that accurate?
Well, that's why I made that reference. So we don't use the model here in the U.S., but in a lot of countries they have like a gendarmerie or it's a national police. It would be almost like an FBI, but an FBI in a more of like an active patrol status, like it's
amazing. It's very interesting.
And a lot of countries use that construct, and they're like an auxiliary, or they have a more roving, and that's kind of how Fish and Game works in conjunct, at least as I've seen it with the state police here in New Hampshire. But then the other layer, of course, is the volunteer groups on the search and rescue side. And that's pretty interesting because the amount of manpower exceeds Fish and Game's application to the problem each year. Or it's roughly neck and neck, but I think the volunteers end up on top by about 1,000 hours, 500 hours, give or take, on any given year. But the fact that so much volunteer help augments this activity is really interesting and unique. It is pretty amazing that it comes together, and it does. And I guess that's what I gauge my thing on. It was very different to me coming up here and learning about it, but it appears to be working within the scope of the requirement. I in the future that might shift, depending on involvement, or whether your numbers go way up on the one side with incidences or whether your numbers drop on involvement. Clearly, if anything shifts one way or the other, there might be a change required. But as we sit here right now, it seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, and Mark, I had a question for you personally. When you got involved in volunteer search and rescue, and again, I'm going to make some assumptions, but I'm probably wrong here. Coming from a military background, I would assume that your approach to things would be sort of much more regimented maybe than some of the volunteers that don't have any perspective on how things are done in the military. Was there any, I guess, level of frustration for you when you initially joined on how things were handled, just because you weren't used to the process that the volunteer teams take, or was it a pretty seamless transition for you?
Well, it's a really good question, and the differences that I bumped into they were significant at first, but it was a difference in just not appreciating. There's a very specific situation that happens here in the Whites And I've not done civilian search and rescue like out in Colorado or, out in the Pacific Northwest or anywhere else. But when I was leaving the military, the one thing that I was interested in doing was trying to figure out like how I could take these skills and fit in, out in the civilian world. And I learned about the incident command system and the National Incident Management Strategy, which was born out of Wild West firefighting, is really where they got the structure from.
Yeah.
With the large-scale Wild West firefighters. And then after 9/11, they figured out, man, none of these agencies can talk together. We need to figure out a way to work together. So I really boned up on that and learned a lot about it. And I felt like, wow, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And then I was told that's how that works out here. And so I did arrive thinking that it would be a bit more structured, more specifically with just task organization and communication and things like that. But then what I ran into was just that what you have in the whites here is a really it's a very kind of unique event, because the whites are a very defined territory. And the way the volunteer organizations have their own little subset territories, you're largely working in the same area. And so in the military, the reason we need to communicate so closely and the reason we need to plan in such detail is we go anywhere in the world and do the same stuff over and over and over again, but we've never been there before. So like we do everything by map reconnaissance. We do everything by looking at the data. We do everything by learning as much as we can, but then we apply all the universal stuff, and then we can overlay that anywhere. Like here looks like Nevada, here looks like the Alps, here looks like Afghanistan. But what you have here is you have these people that have been doing this here for so long, and they've been working the same problem set for so long, that they're at a team functioning level where you just don't need to communicate with that granularity. And so there's nothing wrong with that, but that is different than what I was used to. The very pleasant side of that is this is a very easygoing climate, and this is not a high-stress environment. And other than the fact that someone's having a hard day, because they've been debilitated by an injury or they've been overcome by, atmospheric conditions or something like that. But other than that, as we mentioned, nobody's shooting at us. And we're still in the middle of the White Mountains. We're still in a really wonderful place. And the people are volunteering. So why come and why hang out with jerks if you're volunteering, right? There's just no need.
Yeah.
So that was very pleasant, and it was really fun to become a part of. And it was also a very deep learning lesson for me that we could all use this lesson from time to time, and that is different ways aren't wrong. Different ways are just different. And every organization has its own climate, and every area has its own kind of way that things unfold. This
culture.
Yeah, so that's a long way to say it, but yes, I came at it very much thinking, okay, I know NIMS, I know ICS, I know how searches and rescues are conducted, and I'm thinking that everybody does them the same way everywhere, and that's not entirely the case, although the fundamentals are the same.
Well, I'm sure Fish and Game does. I mean, they are statewide. The variable is the volunteer teams. I don't see Fish and Game's approach changing from region to region in the state, but for sure, the teams are all different. Culturally, like just the way they go about things, but fundamentally, they're doing most of what other teams are doing.
Even Fish and Game is they're very amenable, though. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, when we get to the patient, or when we all converge, they don't say, "Hey,
you got to do this."
I'm so and so, and I'm the incident commander for this, for this iteration, and it's not all block and line, and it's not all. I mean, if it comes down to a decision point, someone will make it, and direction will be given, but it's all very transparent.
That's a good point.
I don't think a patient would ever be able to perceive who's actually in charge. Or at what phase of the process they are. It's very fluid and seamless on the patient's side, I feel.
Well, there's a lot of give and take and a lot of trust with the officers, with the volunteer teams, and vice versa. And that's towards a better outcome in general, I think.
Yeah. There is a lot of cooperation.
Absolutely.
So Mark, as far as, it's been a while, I think, since you exited the military, but like future trends, like me and Stomp have talked about drones, but more and more, like I'm starting to see like these personal flight vehicles and things like that. Like, do you pay attention to any of that stuff? Any thoughts about like any future tech trends related to search and rescue that you're really interested in or excited about?
I think the biggest one is closer to home, and it's already here. And it's really another one of these, it's one of these bridges between the military and civilian systems, and that is the PLBs.
Personal locator beacon.
Yeah, the spots and things like that. And I'm not even up on all the different makers and brands that are out there right now but the fascinating thing about that is that technology works through the national systems that are designed to find pilots and planes and military personnel and everything like that. And the Air Force is the proponent of this in the mainland U.S. So, when you activate that beacon, there's the National Mission Coordination Center in Maryland, and that's run by NOAA and I believe NASA. And then there's the Air Force Recovery Coordination Center, and I believe they're down in Florida. And depending on the type of device and the signal, one of them will get it, and they work to get closer together anyway. So talking about that kind of local thing, we have this shift now to where normally, say you went on a hike up Franconia Ridge, normally the first person that might report you missing might be, someone down at the trailhead or someone back home. Well, with these locator beacons now, what you have is, a signal's going up to a satellite and it's going down to Florida, and they talk with Maryland and they try to triangulate as best they can, and they, then they'll coordinate with the state, because it's still each state's role to figure out how they're going to handle search and rescue, and they'll pass that down to the state, and then the state will give that to, in New Hampshire, that's Fish and Game. So it's very interesting that, now we're bouncing the signal off a satellite, and we are incorporating a national security infrastructure to facilitate civilian, search and rescue recovery. That has helped people get recovered. There is maybe a hazard for, false reports or, lesser incidences kind of, I don't know, causing more work. I don't know what their capacity really is. I have not heard of it being a problem. Personally, I don't know much about the drones or the personal flight devices or anything like that, so I really couldn't speak intelligently on that. But the locator beacons are a big game changer because, as we've mentioned, as anybody who lives up here knows, the mountains are the great equalizer for both FM communications and for cell communications, and even for sat devices, even for people, if you're fortunate enough to have a Thuraya phone or a sat phone or something like that, you still need to get up high to get a signal. You can be, the ridges and valleys can really mess up your signals, but the locator beacons are pretty reliable, and now you can even work two-way communications through them. So that can be a real help. So I think that's allowing people to maybe hike with more confidence, or at least let their loved ones, have a little bit more peace of mind. The two-way ones are great because someone could actually ascertain what your condition is and see what support you require. That's always the big question. What are we going to find when we get there? Initial reporting is often wrong. So no matter how well everybody does it, trying to get that information from, about where a person is and what their condition is, if they can speak for themselves in that regard through one of these devices, that's a huge help.
I've noticed that those have been really helpful. I see a lot more hikers using those in reaches and whatnot, and I wonder if we'll get to the point in search and rescue here where we'll incorporate those, but it just seems so cost prohibitive, some subscriptions and everything else.
Right, and it seems to be working well enough in the fact that at least as it's working, the state gets the information and it comes down to us. Whether we had any organic way to do any more or less with it. The Whites is a pretty defined area. Yeah. It's that being said, you can, if someone's just curled up in the middle of the Pemi Wilderness, they could be lost there for forever. But I don't know what we could do more with it, honestly, because
in terms of our communication, member to member, because that's always a challenge. Thankfully, though, we're not, like you said, we're in this defined area, and we know where we can communicate, where we can't, and where the issues will pop up. So
and there are if we search is kind of being the bigger challenge, carry out is more simple, but there are controls that we could in place if we had, if it's like thinking back to the Mr. Smart, who was missing 3 years ago, back in the Pemi Wilderness. I believe that was his last name.
Chris.
Staff, that's right. But if you coordinate with your elements, if everybody's briefed on the plan, if everybody knows the map, and if everybody has hard like a hard backstop to work against, and also, time and things like that. It doesn't take a lot of tech to incorporate a little bit of control, a little bit of communication, and a little bit of safety oversight in these activities. That's something that so I didn't come with like a list of wants or anything like that, but like that's one. Going back to your question, Mike, about the organization, that's one thing that could be stepped up if necessary, and it really is better if you've trained it first. And that is, it's nice that things are amenable, and it's nice that things are loose, and it's nice that things are very flexible. But if you did have to put a lot of people out on a complex search, it would be good to have training and rehearsals in a little bit more refined levels of control and communication. Because you don't even really need radios for that, but you just need everybody to know what's going on, and people to kind of communicate and check back in and kind of follow the guidelines. It would take just a tish more discipline.
Have you ever found yourself in a particular situation where you needed to be rescued or searched for? Any close calls in your hiking adventures?
It's funny because when you asked me to come on, I thought back and I thought, why do I care about this? And so the answer is, I was in reconnaissance for the larger portion of my career. And in reconnaissance, you are farther forward normally than most all of your friendly elements. And you're much more aware of the assets that are available to come and get you, but you're also, as a mechanism of your life, you spend a lot of time laying alone or with a small team out in the middle of nowhere for days and weeks at a time. And as you're out there, you do consider, man, if something bad happened out here, I really need external help. In other words, like you're not sustainable, as a buddy team or as a small team. And so I think that's what really got me into it was you're very, very aware of your vulnerability, and you're very, very aware that if help needs to come, it's going to have to come from somewhere. And so, no, I personally have never been, injured in the backcountry or lost to such a degree that I needed someone to find me. But being a member of either an infantry reconnaissance team or a sniper team or a special forces team, or any number of these instances where you're in a very small element, very far from support, once you're out there all alone, you really realize that, hey, if help is going to come, it's got to come from somewhere, because it's nowhere in sight on the map around me. I can see, 8 miles in any direction, and there's nothing but me. So
wow,
I think that,
that's a hell of a sensation.
I think that's what kind of brought it into me. And I've just always loved the woods, and I've always loved hiking and camping. And I think it's just realism of, everybody's had that stumble and you're not sure about your ankle. You take a few tentative steps, and you're really hopeful that it's all together structurally. Right. But like, it doesn't take a lot of, it on any given day, it could be you.
It is funny that you say that, because I've had that moment like multiple times where you're out in the Great Gulf and you're having a great time and you're solo, and then all of a sudden you roll that ankle and it starts rolling through your head like, okay, that was a close call and I could have been in big trouble here. But luckily 9 times out of 10, it turns out okay.
Yeah, and you really can push through a lot, and and the body can do amazing things. And again, like going back to how many visitors we have here and how few incidents we have, it really is a testament to human resiliency and even people with little experience, like how strong a person really can be when they need to. And a lot of the people we come and carry out, even, they've made really solid runs at getting themselves down. A lot of them have scooted themselves along and moved themselves along with some pretty significant injuries.
Yeah, I agree.
And we don't meet a lot of people who just kind of like went and it just sat down. Many of them really gave a really hard run at not involving other people before they finally throw up the flag.
Yeah, agreed.
Any good stories about stomp on missions?
Oh, brother.
Man, yes, but they're all good. So,
sorry, Mike.
But,
yeah, when I say good stories, I mean embarrassing.
I know. But here's the thing. So, like, I noticed somewhere in the notes something about Martians.
Oh yeah,
and I don't know anything about Martians, but
okay,
I'm close to one here in New Hampshire, and what I mean by that is, I hadn't been here before at all, before 3 years ago. and I walked through the state before I ever drove a car in it. And then I just moved all my crap here, and that was that. And I was at a point in my life after 21 and a half years, in the closest knit community that you could be in the military. And I walked away from all that, and I separated from my wife. So a 26-year relationship, and another very just everything in my life that had been something for me was gone. And I was really at a place of, who am I and what am I doing? And, that's a wonderful place to find yourself, but you do eventually have to figure out who you are and what you're doing. And so I moved here, and I knew no one. I knew no one but Sandy, and I didn't really even know her. I just knew it was worth exploring. What I knew was that people that help people are generally decent people. And what I knew is that, I didn't want to just shoehorn myself into this community. I wanted to just find a way to be a part, to be myself. And so it's very interesting that I just looked up Pemisar on the internet, and I had found and printed an application. But what's really funny is the very next day after that, Marty Talbot came into yoga. And I met Marty Talbot, and Marty Talbot and I just were talking after yoga class, and she mentioned something about search and rescue. And I said, yeah, I just moved here, but I'd like to help. And she told me about Pemi, and I said, yeah, I've got the application on my dining room table as we speak.
Yeah, it's Providence. It's like right. All timing.
But it's so great. Getting back to Jamie, Jamie comes with the package, and he's very, very embedded in Pemisar and just search and rescue here in general. But what I had hoped to happen happened, and that was I met good people doing good things. And
community.
And over time I learned more about the community, and I found other ways to help, and it really did work out. And the thing I noticed on the first couple calls was that people had genuine interest in each other. Jamie would talk to the other people, and he knew about them, and he knew about their life, and he knew about what was going on. And, clearly we're all focused on the patient and getting them to the care that they need. But more than that, I could see that these people were truly, they knew each other at a really intimate level. And so, I don't have any really embarrassing stories about Jamie.
Good. That's great.
I mean, we could pick on him. We could pick on him about his hip. I mean, that's
God.
like, that's like a perennial favorite. But
well, that's what I always said. Is I said he became the guy at the trailhead with the clipboard and the pencil.
Oh, for a while there, I had to
for a year. Yeah.
Geez. Yeah.
I think that's the funny thing about about Jamie is that Jamie has a mind, and Jamie has a capability to do a lot more and to be that person who can help facilitate this at a much deeper level. But Jamie, see, that's how synonymous they are. Jamie is,
dude. We're gonna. But, he's giving away your.
But he can't keep himself from running up the trail.
Don't worry about it.
He can't keep himself from barreling up the trail. With the litter in his hand. And getting to the patient. So, I'm sure he's chewing his ankle off in the parking lot, like, I'll just hop on one leg like in Monty Python, so
it's funny. Yeah.
But I guess that's my funny story about Jamie is you won't find him administering anything, although he bears a title that would lead you to believe he administers something. But in fact, you're going to find him operationally on the ground carrying people over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Super important to me.
Hip or not. One hip, two hips, three hips. It doesn't matter. He's going to be doing it.
Yeah. It's a passion. Well, it's called passion. That's all.
I will continue to dig. For embarrassing stories. And
maybe I'm just not the guy. Maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention. He might have fallen and smacked his face. I might have missed it.
I know who to talk to. I get Jen and Lindsay back. They'll tell me everything I need to know.
Yeah. Well, this has been great.
So, yeah, this is good. So, very interesting. I guess last question for you, Mark, and you can punt on this one if you want, but it's a subject that always comes up, and I know our friend Casey, this is near and dear to his heart, but sort of reintegration of military into civilian life and all that comes with that, and all the challenges that you see over time. And I'm sure there's many stories where it's a very easy transition, and it's a happy story. But I feel like we also hear a lot of stories about the difficulty of transitioning back into civilian life. So is there any messages you want to give to people that might be looking at going through that, or any thoughts from your perspective about sort of reintegration after being in the military?
Yeah, we have a sizable amount of vets that listen.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's been my life, honestly. I mean, I can speak with great experience to this. So I was 18 and 19 years old, my first enlistment, and I went to Somalia in 1993, and I wasn't there for like the big Battle of Mogadishu or anything like that, but we were locked and loaded with live rounds, and like I found, I'm driving a Humvee all over Somalia, and I found landmines, and we found weapons caches, and there were grenade attacks on, convoys in the city and stuff like that. Like it was a dangerous place, let's just say. For the larger part, nothing happened while I was there, but you had to be alert. And I mean, not only that, it's just, you're going to an entirely different part of the world. You're seeing very, very different living conditions. It really changed me, and it really, it impacted me in deep ways, both good and challenging, but, or even Hurricane Andrew relief. Watching what happened in Hurricane Andrew and getting to help was a wonderful thing, but I had these two really, really phenomenal experiences. But then, I find myself back in my hometown, and, and I didn't even know of it as readjustment challenges back then. But, I dropped out of school, and I was at Penn State, a good school, and looking back, it really was that. It really was a reintegration challenge, and I just didn't even know it for that. And with youthful exuberance, I finally made it out of it. But now the second time when I retired in 2016, I knew what was coming, at least in a small degree. And so and even with that, I whether or not my relationship needed to end is a question worth considering separately. But the fact that 2 months after I retired, I just packed my car and drove away from my house and never went back. I think that's indicative of the stress of the entire kind of time in my life, and the severing of that connection. There is a real bond, when you've endured true life or death situations with people. There's a bond that's very, very different than just other types of bonds. And just the nature of the work, the benchmark level of commitment of just coming in and everything you do to get to serve, and then all the experiences you go through, and then severing that, it's really significant. And I do speak to this on occasion. It's one of the only things I do kind of publicly talk about. I'll be frank about it. I mean, it's not just PTSD, but it's just this whole thing of these experiences are beyond the pale of just what happens out in normal civilian society. And I think that's what makes people feel different, or that they can't relate, or that they can't connect. And that's like a very general way of saying it, but it really is a profound shift. And I've used a number of techniques to help. I've availed myself of mental health services for well over a decade, both while I was in and since I've gotten out. I found the yoga and the mindfulness and the breath work to be the thing that helped me the most significantly. And I will talk to anybody who's willing to listen about that and how that works. And for anybody, honestly, who has any kind of anxiety or any kind of challenge, I really believe that is a way that it doesn't solve your problems. You'll still have difficult life decisions, but it will help you be the best you can be to make those decisions. The challenge with what people perceive to be a civilian-military divide is this: we just have to keep talking. We just have to engage. I mentioned why I joined PEMI, or why I volunteer on the ambulance. The fact is, I am quite comfortable sitting alone in the woods in New Hampshire and not talking to anybody. And I do isolate myself, and I don't feel like I fit in, and I struggle with social relationships, and I don't like small talk. And I do feel very, very different from a lot of people that I find in civilian life. But the fact is, we're human, and the fact is, we're all more the same than different. And the fact is, if you challenge those assumptions, and if you go beyond your comfort zone, if you risk the vulnerability of being yourself with other people, you will find that we are more the same than different, and you will be able to tear down some of those barriers. And I'm appreciative of people's respect on the other side. I don't think that people on the civilian side are cold to us. I think they're respectful, and I think they tiptoe around the subject because they don't want to upset people. You know, they don't want to like ask about uncomfortable things, or they don't want to touch, you know, a touchy nerve. And I can appreciate that. But I'll just say to anybody on either side of this equation, it's really not about being a civilian or being in the military. It's about risking the vulnerability to show your true self to another. And if you can do that, and if you can do that with the healthiest people you can manage to get yourself around, it'll bear fruit. And it will take time. I'm here tonight because I feel good about doing it. I'm here tonight because it's taken, 6 years? I don't know how long. 2016, I retired. So, you know, it's taken that long for stuff to grab traction. It's taken that long for things to actually begin to come together. It's taken that long for organic relationships to unfold.
Yeah.
And so I don't mean to go on and prattle on about that, but it is a real thing, but it's surmountable. It's like anything else. It takes attention, it takes time, it takes compassion, and it takes the risk of vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think people don't. I think we discount sort of like the hard coding of personalities a lot of the time, and we always go towards a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach with everybody. And the point you talked about is like some people are naturally introverts. Some people have a much higher appreciation for new experiences. Some people are sort of much more comfortable about their routine. So if you get somebody that is a natural introvert, that is somebody that is more of a creature of routine and comfort, versus, you know, somebody that looks for new experiences or extroverted, like by definition, they're going to have an even harder time. So you have to appreciate people sort of where they're starting from. And then when you go through an experience like you talked about in the military, where you're, you know, it's a shared experience and it's a tight bonding situation, like I can imagine, and I understand why it would be harder to reintegrate into society. And we're going to talk about this next week. We have a thru hiker coming on in the AT, and you can probably talk about this too, is like you get into these routines over the period of even a month or 2 months doing a thru hike. And even that we find people have a difficult time reintegrating. So for 20 years in the military, it's totally understandable.
Yeah, it is a different world, a different language, different lifestyle and things like that. But the thing is, it's okay to shift. And, you know, one of the hardest things I ever did was laying that down, you know, because some of it, there's a little bit of gender bias, but honestly, I don't think that's the biggest thing about it. But for anybody in one of those highly competitive, highly driven, like achievement oriented or just like challenge based fields, you tend to identify with your work, you know, but what are you? Are you or are you the work? And what happens when you can no longer do the work, or when you just choose to part with the work, or just time and age and injury, you know, take you away from the work? Who are you then? And so this has been the most challenging time of my life, but it's also the most rewarding. And I would just encourage someone to try to drop the us and them mentality. Try that's an instinctive response. You know, we try to identify people as threat or non-threat. And, you know, of course that goes to the core of everything you've trained and done, you know, for your whole military career. But the fact is, things are safer here. Things are better here. It's okay to lay down some of these protective behaviors. And that's really the heart of it. The heart of it is, you know, can we let go of thoughts and habits and behaviors that our body instinctively believes are keeping us alive? Because out here, they're destroying relationships. And out here, they're building walls unnecessarily. And out here, they're reinforcing negative patterns about thinking everybody's out to get you. And so this stuff can weigh pretty heavily across a whole spectrum of, you know, you're worried about your physical security. You're worried about revealing too much. You're worried about letting people in and all this stuff. And courage is not a misplaced word here. That just to be vulnerable and be open and be yourself, it's freaking terrifying. It's much more easy to say, yeah, I'm Mark Roland, I'm a Green Beret. Then you're, everybody knows what to expect. Everybody has you like in a little box. No, you know, if you just want to say I'm Mark, and you just want to be that, that opens up this whole Pandora's box of like what life can be. But that's all the good things in life are in that box. So, I mean, I just encourage people. It feels very awkward, and it's going to feel awkward. It's going to keep feeling awkward. I'd say keep going into that discomfort. Keep going towards what you don't want to do. And because in that's where the overcoming it comes. And I can't tell you that it's easy, but I can tell you that it will definitely work out better. And I could be a very negative person. I could be a very, very jaded person. There have been a lot of experiences that caused a lot of pain, and they will continue to do so. They just don't stop. But the fact is that life is good, and the fact is it's worth being here.
Yeah, and the thing too is if you don't keep moving, like you kept going past the 100-mile wilderness, and then you moved into New Hampshire, and now you're here. If you didn't have the strength to do that, who knows what direction you would have been going into. So we're glad you're here, and we're glad that you continue to move forward.
Well, thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny how things go. There was nothing planned about anything about how the past few years have unfolded, and it's all gone really nice. And it,
That's great. Well, you deserve it. And I'm going to say it. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your ongoing service as a awesome public servant. You're out there helping the community.
Thank you.
Yeah. Exactly. And if I wipe out on the trail and I need a litter carrier, I expect you to show up.
We'll come. If you build it into your hiking plan, it makes it a nice time. I sit around, and it's not that I rejoice in someone's discomfort or anything like that. It's just that, I keep a little gas in the tank for a carryout.
Absolutely.
Because you never know when they're going to happen, and you never know how long they're going to take, and you never know where they're going to be. And so it's like this nice little placeholder in your life, and it's just a little question mark, is it going to happen or not?
Yeah.
I'm planning mine. I'm either going to end up needing a rescue halfway down the Lincoln Slide, or it's going to be, let me think, in the middle of the Kilkenny Ridge on the Weeks. We'll need a carryout. I can find a good spot for you guys.
Make sure it's 3 a.m. too.
3 a.m. too, right? So,
Slasher's hiking topic of the week.
we did want to move on to a quick segment about trail design. So Stomp sent me a PDF from the federal government that is 178 pages about all the rules to build trails.
Show prep. Here you go, Mike.
Show prep. I'm like, what the hell is this? 180 pages? What is he out of?
You did the read ahead, right?
Yeah, and I read it all too. But it's interesting. So I don't think we have although I will say there's been a lot of trail building on the Cohos Trail up north, but I can't think of too many new trails in this area. I think we're pretty well established.
Oh, sure.
But I think that so I just picked out a few things. So I skimmed the 178 pages, and I skimmed out I picked out a few things that I thought were interesting. So one of them is, there's a whole science to this, and there's expert level trail builders. But the interesting ones that I picked out here was, one is that when you're building a trail, the trail is supposed to look like it was supposed to be there. So basically, as you build it, there should be little evidence that there was work that went into them. So that means that especially these early founders, they had to figure out the contour of the land, figure out going on the ridge lines or going on the drainages, figuring out ways to move along them. And they in some cases they did a pretty good job, but I found that pretty interesting that you're basically supposed to be able to figure out where the trail should go from a natural perspective and build it that way. The other one here, that this rule was broken in the whites so significantly, but the 10% rule. So you're not supposed to build anything 10% grade or more.
Oh, wow.
You'd never get anywhere here without that.
Well, that's the role of a switchback then.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then they say the half rule, and this is sort of an extension of this, is that the trail grade should be no more than half the side slope grade. So basically, if you're going on a slanted grade that's 8%, you should only be going up that slanted grade at a 4% rate. in order to ensure that the trail doesn't get washed out.
The runoff,
Gotcha.
the velocity of the water.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
It sure does.
Yeah, which is interesting. And then the last one here is sort of the dirt, water, and gravity are what trail work is all about. Dirt is your trail support. Terra firma makes getting from point A to point B possible. The whole point of trail work is to get dirt where you want it and keep it there. And then water is the most powerful stuff in the world. Gravity is water's partner in crime. Their mission is to take your precious dirt to the ocean. So the whole point of trail work is to keep your trail out of water's grip, which basically, again, this half rule is exactly what it talks about, is to ensure that you're not getting the trail wiped out. You got to make sure that your slope is not so steep on a side grade, because a lot of times you are building a trail on a side of a grade, and you've got to make sure that you're not putting it so steep that it's just going to get run off by water.
Fascinating stuff. Where did these rules come from? Just trial and error?
I don't know. I don't really know, but I do wonder.
There are some masters at this.
Oh, I bet.
You've got some people. I can get you some people that might be interested in coming on and talking to you about this.
That'd be amazing.
Because I'm basically a layperson in relation to this subject, but I have seen and talked to some of the people that do this like at a master level, and it is
wow.
That whole thing about it fitting like it should be there. Think about how often that's something so natural, and it's something that it doesn't even occur to us so frequently, but that's how well these trails were laid in, because they are on these natural paths. It's the best navigable way through that area. And we take it for granted, and you cruise right across it, and you don't even think of, glancing left and right. Well, if this was anywhere else, how much crappier would this walk be? And I know it's not always easy, and there's oftentimes it's very steep or whatnot, but it's still the best line available based on the conditions at hand. But designing that, it's art and science at a really high level.
Well, think about building these things back in the day, like with the Crawfords and Edmund's Path and all these things. No electronic recon or anything, just incredible.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, like the Crawford path and the Davis path, which are sort of the two early paths. How did they know what direction to follow? And a lot of times they just went with sort of either in the drainage, or they would follow ridge lines. And obviously, it worked out, but how did they know when to sort of cut it and go left? Because there's a couple of sections of the Davis path where they do have some switchbacks there, and you got to wonder, were those part of the original trail, or were they just sort of following deer paths, or did they know something about the land from a technique perspective that told them to switch it off? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they went up multiple times. It's probably repetition.
Yeah.
And
there's one thing different about the trails here that might have it's like the trails here are largely recreational. And the way that's been described to me is that in other areas of the world, some of these trails are like ancient trade routes. They were navigated by animals, laden animals, people with carts, everything else. So they've got a different kind of a flavor. So when we exceed some of these grades and slopes and pitches and stuff, a lot of this is simply because we wanted to go, to this hilltop and that hilltop and this other hilltop. But none of us were carrying water to and from a village, or none of us were taking our animals to market or anything like that. So some of our trails around here are kind of zany when compared to something that was actually a trade route. But again, I only know the barest edge of all of this, but there are some people that are true masters at the stonework, the water runoff, the trail construction. There's a lot that goes into it, way more than as a hiker you really appreciate. And
we should do some research about that, Mike. Differentiate between the recreational and the older paths, like the Mount Jacora, that used to be a toll road for commerce and things like that. That'd be really interesting to look into.
Yeah, and Mark, if you have any connections of people that are experts on this, because the other thing too that we don't talk about, and I don't know if there's anything to it, but were Native Americans building any paths up here back in the even more ancient times? I don't know how much evidence there is of Native American travel this far north, and it's pretty far away from sort of waterways, so I don't know, but that could also be something that happened where there was already some established trails through this area that early trail builders were able to jump on. I've never really read anything about that, but I'd be curious. Sounds good. So so the transitioning out of the trail building segment, so we'll do more details on this, and I'll include in the show links the PDF that's like 180 pages if people want to geek out on it.
Let's dive into some White Mountains history, shall we?
We wanted to do a quick segment about Joe Dodge, who is, it's sort of a good segue because, he was an early trail builder, but I think the way that I think of Joe Dodge is, first and foremost, he was probably like the first search and rescue person in the Whites. And obviously there was a lot of rescues going on before him. His sort of years of operation were like the mid-1920s up until the mid-1950s, but he generally was the main search and rescue guy around the Pinkham Notch and White Mountain area. So I think, Jamie, or Stomp, you had said that you wanted to do a segment on him, so we pulled up a little info on him. So I think by way of background, if you go to Pinkham Notch, there is Joe Dodge Lodge, which is like the AMC lodge that is at Pinkham Notch that you can stay over. And the connection there is that Joe Dodge, as a young man, moved from, I think he was from Manchester, Mass. He moved up to Pinkham Notch and was working, I think, for the AMC as a seasonal employee, had decided that he was going to stay year-round in Pinkham Notch to do surveying for some of the forestry companies that were basically looking to audit, how much available land or trees there were for harvesting in the area. And eventually what ended up happening is that he became so connected to the area. He got married to a lady from Cambridge. I don't know what the hell she thought about when she married him and had to move up here, but he was the first person to stay year-round in Pinkham Notch. And eventually he got called on by the AMC hut committee because there was an existing hut system already in place by the time he had moved up here. There was 4 huts, I believe, and he was asked basically to maintain and be the hut master for the area. So he maintained all the early huts, and then I believe Zealand and Galehead, I think he was responsible for locating those locations for the huts. I don't know what the hell he was thinking putting them there because it must have been pretty deep in the woods, but he then oversaw the rebuilding of the existing hut system and then the building of the new huts over the course of like 30 years of him being involved as the AMC hut master. Eventually, he also went on to help build and start the Mount Washington Weather Observatory. So this guy had his hand on everything.
And he was the first to bring in radio stuff, for communication.
Yep.
Early radio.
Yeah, he had worked on radios in the military.
Right.
And he incorporated that into how he did things up here.
Neat guy.
Yeah,
legend.
and I read a little thing about the radio. He did a thing where he would, for at his cost, like the people coming in on ships, I think he would, but maybe this might have been before he was up north, but he would take whatever the signals were from the people on the ships and like basically pass the messages on to their wives and family members that they were on their way, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I bumped into that myself. I in a little bit, it was a few years back, but I ran into something about him, and it seems that he had an interesting relationship with Fish and Game, which was very fledgling at the time. I mean, Fish and Game, I don't think they really got officially going until 1950 or so, if I remember right, here in New Hampshire.
Right.
But of course, he was known to be foul-mouthed and kind of abrupt and everything like that. But yes. I saw some quotes, pretty disparaging remarks about what he called the fish police. And
fish cops?
Yeah, the fish cops. And it seemed that he, was not as enamored, with them in there. And it's interesting because they're the ones who are now, have the proponency for search and rescue in New Hampshire.
Sure,
but I'd be interested in hearing from some like our longtime fish and game people, like some of the 30-year people or just anybody that has any, any overlap, and probably not current overlap, they probably didn't work with him, but just what that right. time was like, or why there were these perceived frictions between him and the fish police, or lack of respect. That just seemed to be just from the vignettes that I saw. And
I got a quote that you guys will appreciate. So he was asking about what his rescue technique was. And this was a quote in the news. So he's like, and I love this because this is like the most 40s and 50s quote ever. So he's like, my theory is that if some damn goofer, we got to bring that word back, some goofer is lost, you should figure what any sensible person would do and then look in the opposite direction. So he's basically like, use common sense and then do what the opposite of common sense tells you.
Right.
So, which is pretty good. But, and I also, one thing I missed here is that they built Greenleaf. So it looks like they did Greenleaf, Geelhead, and Zealand. So they did the ones that connect through the Pemi, which is pretty impressive.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting, I don't know a lot about him. It seems like definitely one of these larger than life personality type characters. But right. One of the things that fascinated me was that there was a business model to it all, and I was unaware of that. This is another being new to New Hampshire and new to the whites in a relative sense, that like he increased the flow of traffic through the huts to such a degree that it increased the revenue very, very substantially. So. And I realized that he did a lot for conservation, and I'm not saying any of this in a negative fashion. I'm just saying that there was a commercial aspect to this undertaking also, and he did drive revenue, and facilitate, however you want to put it, facilitated guest services or facilitated throughput as far as stays, or I don't quite know the lingo of how we would approach this, but just the fact that more people came, more people stayed in the huts, more people clearly got to see and enjoy the area. But based on his efforts and based on his expansion of the hut system and his expansion of he also expanded the services that they offered. So
yeah. And what's amazing too is when you look at the timeline. So let me see here. So it looks like from 1929 through 1931, he spent those 3 years building Greenleaf, Geelhead, and Zealand Falls. He then pivoted immediately in 1932 to build the Mount Washington Observatory. So like all the existing infrastructure that we think of as sort of like the sort of linchpins of the hut system and the White Mountains, that was all put up in 5 years by this guy.
And that's another thing that struck me was the timeline. This is the middle of the Great Depression. So, like in other areas, like I'm familiar with the Civilian Conservation Corps work. They did a lot of the parks and things in Pennsylvania. A lot of the little small dams and little state park areas and things like that were projects that were done by the Civilian Conservation Corps at the time to keep people working. And they're still there today. They're still existing today and everything like that. But that is another interesting layer to all of this, is that how through grants and other mechanisms that they were doing this work up here. And I did see a quote where he really felt that his greater contribution to humanity was in the observatory rather than the huts,
right? Which
is really interesting. But it's fascinating that one person just basically worked so hard and did so much. That part amazes me. Just the amount of output. This is all handwork.
For the mountains.
Yeah, this is all with donkeys and with human labor and with I think they did have a little bit of mechanized stuff, but not a lot.
Incredible.
Yeah. It wasn't like they were just using helicopters to fly things in.
Nope.
Like it was an army. And I think a lot of the connection to sort of the funding for this and the tourism does come back to sort of the academic and probably the more elite class people that were living down in like Boston and I'm sure New York and Connecticut. And they made their decision to sort of make their sort of summer playground the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And I think a lot of those people brought a lot of money into this and invested, but they certainly picked a guy that was capable of getting things done. And that's a rare thing. You work with hundreds of people over the course of your life, and there's very few people that have such a bias towards action. And this guy, I mean, it's just crazy to think about like what he accomplished. And you also don't think about like the lack of comfort compared to the way we live right now, the way this guy, like he would take showers in Pinkham Notch when he originally got up there. He would take showers by rubbing snow all over his body.
Right. Yeah, just keeping the crews going. I mean, that, anybody who's managed just even, a small amount of work crew type of work and, just keeping the people, the materials, the work going and, and the inflow and outflow of all of everything you need. It's just a phenomenal amount of work. And to think he was scratching it out with hand notes and with messengers and with, we do know he did have radio, but like it, just a level of, I agree, a level of output that just fascinates.
Yeah. And he would, I'm just reading right here, like he would go 20 miles down to, like 10 miles down to Gorham and then 10 miles back and like carry like 80 or 100 pounds back on his skis. And then also he used his radio connection when he got bored up in Pinkham. He was like, I got to get married. So somehow he was able to connect to Boston to hey, get a message to my whatever girlfriend or the girl that I like. I'd like to get married. Yeah, his
isn't that the word back then?
Whoever he was courting, is that what they did back then? Courting. So yeah, he was able to get a wife over the radio. That's a true man.
Leveraging technology. It's not a dating app, but it's similar.
Today it would have been TikTok.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but good stuff. So quite a character, and I like these history segments. But this guy Joe Dodge, there's a book about his life that I'll link in the show notes, and it's pretty interesting. But Stomp, I think we're at 2 hours here, so we're gonna bail on the search and rescue stuff, and we'll talk about snowmobile stuff next week. But anything before we wrap up?
How about your yoga? Do you want to plug that at all before we wrap up, or just let it go?
I mean, honestly, yoga has helped me immensely, and breath work and just being present in your body I recommend it to anybody and everybody, and I think the world would be a better place if we all just did that. But there's a good studio in Lincoln, Live a Little Fitness, and just a small local place, and they help a lot of people, and a really good atmosphere. And it's another one of those things where I looked for good people doing good things, and they didn't disappoint.
I think you should start yoga, Mike.
Me? I need to. I'm really like not flexible. Yeah, I need to like, and so for me, I feel like the running for me sort of gives me my zen. Like that's my like hour in the morning to sort of get in my head, and I feel sort of like I've reset for the day. But I'm assuming yoga would do something similar. But I do need to like work on my flexibility a little bit, so we'll see. Nobody wants to see me in yoga pants. I'll tell you that.
I tell you, it's not about making your body into a shape just to get to a certain place. It's just about working from where you're at. But every little bit of just getting a little bit of the tension out is extremely useful. And I've got a lot of injuries, honestly, and my injuries are much less debilitating because of the stretching. Yeah. And my mental stuff is way, way, way better because of the breath awareness and the body work.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I got to get more zen. I'm more of a goal-oriented person. Like that's the one thing that's like a turnoff for me for yoga. It's like I don't want to be in the moment. I want to be like, all right, I got to run 5 miles today. Let's bang it out. And now I feel like I accomplished something. You know what I mean? Like
if you're a challenge-based person, that's your challenge. Yeah. There's your new challenge. Can you just be here? You want to do something hard? I mean, hey, I'm just speaking as a former Green Beret, speaking as someone who, I'm very familiar with goal-driven people or action-oriented people. I'm familiar with Jamie's sensation of being unable to sit in the parking lot. I'm just saying, The thing that you feel is the hardest thing for you to do is the thing that probably deserves your attention. And if you really want a challenge, take this trip, friend.
That's a good point. That is a good point. And
it won't disappoint.
Sort of the yoga thing has been circling around for a while, so maybe I'll try to find my zen.
Hey, here's the thing. It happens little by little. So in other words, like you don't have to just sit still all alone in a white room for a day right now. Like you can go from your current level of activity, both mental and physical, and you can just begin to explore that edge. In other words, like it doesn't take a major shift.
Yeah.
It just takes a little bit of attention. If that helps take the bite off a little bit.
Yeah. You know what I do need to do, though, is even without the yoga, and I know Stomp's going to go to bed here, so I'll shut up, but
No, I'm good.
I cannot touch my toes, so I've done a couple of times I've done that sort of challenge about like touch your toes challenge, and I focused for like 3 or 4 weeks of like stretching so I could actually touch my toes. Maybe I'll at least do that.
Oh,
you never know where it can go. But really, though, here's the thing is you're not inflicting it on yourself. It's a whole different approach. You're moving into it as your body allows. And that's a very, very interesting trip to take. So it's not like you're stretching your muscle like you're stretching a rubber band. You're finding that edge and waiting for the muscle to relax and then moving into the space you created. Because if you try to just yank it, it's going to reflexively tighten up.
Yeah.
So I'll throw that tip out there.
I'm going to be the worst yoga person ever. But Stomp, you look like you're going to die, so we're going to wrap up here. You had a long day. But Mark, thank you so much.
Yeah,
and
thanks
we will
for having
definitely
me.
load up the show notes. Yeah.
This has been a great chat. And we'll have you back again if you
2
want.
hours, Stomp.
Heck, yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered on today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information on slasrpodcast.com. That's SLASR podcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until next time, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words that describe this race. Do we all know what they are? Only one hill!
Lieutenant James Neeland, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got a list of the 10 essential items and had those in their packs, they probably would have no need to ever call us at all.